Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not to Comic Book. This being a show, we're talking about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about part 2 of Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. First and foremost, I'll talk about a little bit of my general thoughts in the form of non-spoilers, and then I will transition into spoilers, but obviously I'll let you know when I'm doing that. First off, non-spoilers, how did I feel about the season? I thought it was a great season. If you love season 1, you're definitely going to love season 2 because it's building upon that. It's kind of got that same feeling aesthetic, and it hits you for a lot more. There were a lot of twists and turns I didn't expect, a lot of character development I didn't expect in certain regards. I'm like, oh wow, that happened. Oh snap, that's crazy. So that's kind of it, I guess. Like, it's really good. If you've not seen all of part 2, and wanted to kind of know ahead of time, is it worth seeing? I highly recommend you check it out. It's really good. So that's the end of the quick non-spoiler discussion. Going forward, I will be going into spoilers, so do keep that in mind. You have been warned. So, where the hell do I start? There is so much that went down this season. I guess, first of all, let's talk about, Sabrina to a certain extent. It's kind of interesting because obviously I went back and rewatched part 1 and obviously the Christmas special, which kind of falls into place of part 1 is more of a winter special. But nevertheless, it's kind of interesting because I didn't realize it until I rewatched it. Like, wow, Sabrina didn't change too much. She kind of maintained a lot of who she was in part 1. But the beginning of part 2 on, it's like you really start to see Sabrina start changing, because obviously she's going further and further down the dark path. But ever since she signed, the Dark Lord's book, it really you really see the shift, because that was something she was worried about at the end of part 1. But in this part, you really get to see it kind of shine through. Obviously, the continuation of her kind of doing whatever she wants, and I think that has always been Sabrina's strongest point. Like, she's always kind of done things where it's kind of like, obviously a lot of stuff doesn't align with her, so she kind of goes her own way. But I feel like, in all honesty, she's not as, in certain regards, I feel like she's not as stubborn as she was in part 1. I mean, to be fair, yes, she still did a lot of stuff with breaking the rules and stuff like that, but I feel like it wasn't nearly as much, or just kind of like boom as in part 1. But maybe that's just me, I don't know. Her story is interesting too, because she actually spent a lot more time in the academy, which I think in the grand scheme of things actually, it balances the story very well, because obviously a lot of part 1 took place, more of on her mortal life. Obviously she balanced that with her life at the academy, but it's obviously a big part of this was a lot more at the academy, because I think that's obviously there was more of a balance in part 1. In part 2, she's trying to bring back the balance. At first, she's trying to ignore it completely. It's actually kind of sad when you actually find out the reason why she's not going to Baxter. It's not just because, she's growing tired of her mortal friends. It's the Dark Lord is going to call upon me at one point in time, and I don't want Harvey, Roz, or Susie anywhere near me when that time comes, because I don't want them to see me like that. And it's that's so sad that things kind of break down like that. But at the very least, obviously things progress between her and Nick, and that whole love triangle situation, because it gets complicated because she's in and out in Harvey's life, and obviously Harvey's kind of pushing her away at first, but then he kind of feels no, I'm done with this, because it's you can't just come in and out of my life like that, Sabrina. You want to protect me and stuff like that. It's no, I'm done with that. And because it's sad, because all Sabrina's ever done is try to protect him, and it's just kind of blown up in her face. I did not expect the Harvey and Roz situation. Did not see that coming until she had the vision of them kissing. I'm like, whoa! That's because even Roz felt bad about it, because it's that's Sabrina's boyfriend, because they've always kind of been a group of friends, so it probably feels that little weird gap of oh, I'm dating my best friend's boyfriend's ex-boyfriend, but still. Everything that went down with Theo, I thought that was kind of a nice progression for Theo's character, because obviously, I think it's a lot that was already kind of there in part 1, but you really see it kind of fill out, because Theo at first is oh, I'm going to try out for the basketball team and everything. It's kind of interesting because it never came up until later on, but Theo knew that Sabrina, it's oh, I saw her, muttering in the stand, so I knew she made it, so that I made every shot. Never said anything, but I guess always just secretly appreciated, because it's actually sad later on. I'm bouncing all over the place, so I do apologize. Do know that I am literally going to be all over the place with this. But I thought it was so sad when the time came, they literally thought the worst of Sabrina, because in Roz's head it's oh, I'm going blind. I didn't see that coming, but to be fair, they literally tell you in part 1, it's her doctor was oh no, her eyes are going to get bad, in 3 months it's going to start really kicking in, and because it just seemed like it came out of nowhere. But then Ross starts thinking like, well, the fact is witches cursed this blindness on us, and then all of a sudden I just happen to get blind around the time I start making out with Harvey. And so she's like, did you do it? And Sabrina's like, what? And Harvey's like, did you? It's like, you guys would, the fact is that you would even literally think that, because even Theo's like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, the fact of the matter is she's done so much for us. She literally saved the town. It's like, oh, but she saved us from witches. And then, you know, Theo brought up the fact is of what she did for him. And then also like Harvey, it's like, you weren't even dating anymore, and she gave your dad that eggnog so he'd stop drinking, which it seems like Harvey and his dad actually have a better relationship. It's interesting. We never actually got to see it, but we did hear about it, obviously. But it was just kind of interesting, and that's sad. And I guess that was the whole point. It's actually kind of interesting because Wardwell, actually, Lilith, didn't have to play her role as much as she did. Because obviously a lot of part one was her kind of like trying to put a divide between Sabrina and her friends. But I guess for her it was a whole thing of like, well, I kind of don't have to do that job as much anymore. Even the whole thing of going back to becoming principal and everything. Did see that coming. That was interesting. Also, the Adam situation, which interesting enough is the actor, I'm gonna butcher his name. I think it's Alexis Disneyoff, isn't that it? I'm blanking on his character. He's from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and Angel. Like, you've seen, he's popped up in so much stuff, but those are like the things I know him best from. I'm blanking on his character's name. It's been a long time. But nevertheless, I thought that was kind of sweet, that whole storyline, especially for, you know, Wardwell, because we actually learned a little story in this, like just how, and it's actually kind of sad because, like, you know, they put on that play at the Academy, and it's like, it's got to, I said it at the time I was watching, I was like, it's got to be rough, literally watching a depiction of your story, because it's a reminder of just how you got to where you are, and it's kind of, you can tell, like, it was bothering Lila, because I'm pretty sure, yeah, she teared up during it, just because of a reminder of, like, those times where things were different, you know, kind of, even, like, hearing, like, you know, this, like, you know, performance of, like, oh, the speech that he gave her, like, Lucifer gave her all those years ago, you know? All that time ago, about basically, you know, promising her what now Sabrina's going to get, you know, because now you kind of get the more context to it. It's like, because you also understand, like, because Lucifer was like, basically, be with me, don't worry about going back to the garden and being with Adam and everything, which now it's like, oh, she finds out, like, oh, Wardwell was engaged to a dude and his name is Adam, but he actually touches Lilith's heart, because I think for her, you know, and I guess it's just, you know, tragic, poetic irony, the whole situation, that even when it was all said and done, Wardwell tried to keep the whole situation secret, tried to be with, you know, Adam in secret. It's, I think for her, it was almost trying to make up for the past. It's like, it didn't work out in the past, but I can make it work out now. She even made that whole thing about, you know, like, oh, marriage for her was like, the fact is, like, marriage is kind of like the death of a woman in a certain regard. Not her exact words, but it was basically like, marriage is kind of like this flowery road that you go down where a woman basically loses herself, losing her personhood, who she is, because basically it kind of molds into like a whole thing of like, just leaving it at the fact is you lose a lot of who you are. In particular case, the woman does, and she gets nothing in return. But for her, like, you know, Adam was like, the fact is I love you, and the fact of the matter is, you know, I'm sorry whoever hurt you, but I will never hurt you. But and it's so interesting, like, Lilith being who she is, you'd kind of thought, like, especially all the people she's used and eaten, you would expect that not to affect her, but it's like, it did. And she was actually considering to run away from him until the Dark Lord found out, and hey, killed Adam. Not only killed him, literally fed him to Lilith. That kind of, once again, just showed you how much of an asshole the Dark Lord is. But it was so interesting when it was all said and done, too. Like, it turned out Stalos was, like, the snitch. I kind of figured as much because when they were on the bridge talking about going to Tibet and everything, he was nearby. I was like, that's why the Dark Lord brought you. Because I thought it was kind of interesting. He just happens to bring Stalos back. I mean, especially considering the fact that she's the one that killed Stalos in the first place. But it's like, no, he was brought back to be a snitch. And she, in her rage, just screamed and burst him into flames. So some other things to talk about is Zelda's situation, which was kind of interesting. Like, I love her in that Shirley Jackson situation of, like, her just being like this. It was almost like, oh, are we schoolgirls or something? Because it's like, oh, calling her like a hussy and stuff like that because of her relationship with Blackwood, and Zelda being like, you know what, we're going to cut off all the stuff that's happening between us until you're ready to make our relationship public. And also Zelda kind of controlling her with that worm, and is literally about to have her, like, walk off the edge, and it's like, oh, I stopped her this time, but next time you or her do anything, she's plummeting off the edge. I was like, yo, I even love that she wanted to cook up the frog familiar that Shirley put in her throat. But what I really loved and I thought was kind of pretty neat was like Hilda's response later on. It's like, oh, you sent Constance's ghost after my sister, which is interesting considering the fact is because Constance was like, oh, you're trying to steal my babies, trying to steal my husband, which is like, that's a whole you and your husband's relationship was a super complicated thing anyway. But obviously Constance was just being used by Shirley. But I love how Hilda handled that. Hilda was kind of like, the fact is, a lot of people might think, I'm meek and, very timid. But the fact of the matter is, when it comes to my sister, yes, she even kills me on occasion. But the fact of the matter is, I love my sister. Basically, don't get that twisted. And it's like, well, because of everything went down, I got these protection up. It's like, oh, that's why I gave you these cookies that have almonds, because that's to hide the cyanide in it. It's like, Jesus! Hilda goes hard, dude. I love it, dude. Like, especially because she does have such a mild and timid side. You wouldn't expect her to kind of be the way she is. But I love, like, Shirley's head hits the table. She's like, oh, that's going to bruise. It's like, you're scary, Hilda, and I like it. Especially everything that goes on with Mr. C. I think I'd let it slip my mind that thing that happens to him at the end of part 1 and his eyes shifting. We immediately kind of get to that because at first it seems like he's pushing Hilda away even though there's something there. Turns out what he's hiding, I was like, is he a werewolf or something? It's like, no, he's an incubus. That was interesting. And I love that Hilda went to Zelda about it, and she's like, oh, you did this and this and this, and Hilda's like, how do you know about that? She's like, oh, you act like I've never run into like sex demons before. And I thought was the most adorable thing is that Hilda is so timid about the conversation of sex anytime it came up, because there was that was it Lupercalia, that little kind of orgy fest. Essentially, we can chalk it up to that whole situation. But the fact is that it's like anytime like sex came up, you had Hilda being like, oh no, and Zelda's like, to be fair, it's such a natural thing. And then, Hilda being like, don't push Sabrina into something if she's not comfortable in it. I just thought that was so interesting. I even love later on when she ended up killing one of the Methuselah, one of the councilmen, because he started getting all handsy. It's like, oh, I'll help you with everything you need if you kind of being creepy old man. It's like, dude, is everyone here a creepy old man? Because even the anti-pope, interesting enough, played by Ray Wise. That was a kind of surprise. I was like, hey, Ray Wise, that's pretty dope. Even he was creepy and perverted, because almost like, oh, look at you, you're so beautiful, ha ha ha. It's like everyone in that group is kind of perverted. And, I mean, to be fair, it's kind of interesting because when you break everything down in that group, like religion, especially what like Faust's, Blackwood was trying to do with everything, like, kind of a piece of shit. Especially the way he was like, oh, because Sabrina wants to be top boy, and everyone kind of had the reluctancy to it. I was kind of surprised that Prudence had his back, but then Prudence was like, she had Sabrina's back, and then like, oh, what if I tried out for, top boy, and then Blackwood was like, oh God, no, I'm not going to let you prance around and embarrass us. It's like, Jesus, that's your daughter. And then when it's like, but I am your daughter, and it's like, oh, technically, it's like, technically nothing, that's your DNA, you piece of crap. Then there's like, Blackwood proposing to Zelda. There's just so much that went down. Like, there's so much to talk about. I just don't know where, and I'm keep bouncing all over the place, so I do apologize. That whole marriage situation is, because obviously, like, Zelda didn't go into it with love for her. It's like, no, this is a way to raise up the Spellman name, a means to an end. And I also love that Sabrina kind of kept it straight up, too. She was like, oh, no, I'm not going to stop at, top boy, I'm gonna be high priestess one day too. And it's like, whoa, wait, what? Blackwood did not appreciate that, because he's an asshole. He doesn't like it, and like any asshole, he doesn't want to be challenged. It's like, no, how dare you try? And this position that's been held by men before, she's like, no, I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna get that position. My aunt's never said it exactly in his words, but she's always pushed me to believe that I can be anything, and I'm going to be high priestess. I mean, her dad was one. Why wouldn't she be one, It is kind of interesting, I guess, because he's current in line, so it does turn into a bloodline thing, but you would think Sabrina would naturally have some advantage in becoming a new high priestess, just because her dad was at one point in time one. He was actually probably one of the most renowned ones, so you would think that would kind of give her a little nudge in that department. But I guess once the new high priestess taken over, his bloodline takes advantage of it. It doesn't matter who was there before. She wasn't old enough and in a position to take over, so now someone else has, so it ends up coming down to that. But nevertheless, a storyline I thought was kind of interesting, once again I'm all over the place, so I do apologize, was the Nick situation. His familiar Amalia, that really took me by surprise. I was like, what the hell is that all? Because at first I thought he was going to be like, is that his mom or something like that? It's like, no, it's even sadder. His mom had died and his familiar is all he had. The fact is that she gets super jealous when he's around other people. So he's never really been in a lot of relationships. Well, he had been in relationships, but they were all kind of cut short in the past because of that. So he ended up banishing her, and he was kind of free from her for a little while. But then she pops up again, and it's like he loves Sabrina. So it's like, oh, he pretended like he had killed Amalia, but he couldn't let her go because it's like she raised me as kind of like took me in as almost like one of her cubs. It's like, for him, he never had his parents growing up, and so for him, it's like she was all he had. So it's like, how can I kill the person that's been there for me, the only family and only person I have, you know? It's actually quite sad that things ended up playing out to that point. That's what I was kind of wondering, was there actually more to that? That was probably all an orchestrated plan. Obviously, we find out later on about Nick, but it's like, I kind of had my, like, I hope Nick's not playing Sabrina. But the fact is that, you know, the revelations that come up about Nick later on about him being kind of like put in Sabrina's life and all, it makes you wonder, was that part of it too, to kind of bring them closer together potentially? I mean, to be fair, that situation almost tore them apart. So I kind of feel like that was more so Nick's personal baggage coming to the very complicated situation. So it is kind of sad when it was all said and done. Like Zelda, I think because she was so certain of thinking like she'd be able to kind of change things in her own right, that she thought, I guess, Black would be more appeasable, because it's that, I mean, and I think that's that sad situation of like, he seems so amendable at first, but then when they got married, you kind of saw his true colors, because it's like, what are you doing walking beside me? The wife walks behind the husband. It's like, oh, Jesus. Because like his doctrine that he's making and stuff like that he wanted the new, you know, he wanted the Church of Night to kind of take on his new direction, was very misogynistic. It was basically putting women in a lower position, that men are the ones who have the right to inherit the earth and stuff like that. Never labeled for mortal, blah, 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 straight up on some bullshit. You know, what kind of label is that? So, but I think, you know, Zelda, she kind of let everything go because it's like, hey, like she liked, you know, and at the very least, she admit she didn't love Blackwell, but at least she respected him and thought probably he had the best of intentions. But it's like, no, all he ever cared about was looking out for his own. Prudence finally got what she wanted, to be recognized as a Blackwood. And it's so interesting when and I love that being like the driving force behind her, because let's not forget, like, she's been holding on to that ever since she found out, like, oh, he's my dad, because she was an orphan. But now it's like, oh, I actually have a father, I have a family. And so for her, she was willing to do whatever, bend over backwards. She would never doubt him, even when everything kind of presented itself. And because even Sabrina's like, we're friends. She's like, no, we've never been friends. You only come around when you need something from me, Dorcas, or Agatha. The fact of the matter, it's like, I saved you from the feast of feasts. It's like, that was all for you. It's like, how the hell was that for Sabrina? I guess for her, it's just, I guess in her mind, in Prudence's mind, it's like, you just needed an excuse to kind of break the rules like you wanted to and stuff like that. But I just thought that was so interesting, that was kind of her perspective in the whole situation. Like, I mean, Sabrina literally went out of her way to try and save you on multiple occasions. It didn't really benefit her to do that. You could make the argument, was in many regards to her detriment to certain instances, but still. But like, it's kind of, and I'm kind of glad Prudence eventually kind of saw through her dad, because obviously Prudence has a bit of a mean streak in her. But when it came to her dad being a Blackwood and everything, she had a much meaner streak. Obviously the whole Ambrose situation, trying to torture him and being mean to him, which is interesting considering they kind of had that whole back and forth thing for a little while. And like, they went through everything they did, and literally had an orgy last season because of the Feast to Feast situation, her being chosen and everything. Also, like, you know, because for her, she believed in Blackwood just because it's like, it's my father, he'd never lead me or anyone astray, you know. And I thought it was kind of impressive what Ambrose said later on. I thought it was kind of a nice line. It's like, you and me, we were both looking for a father figure in Blackwood, and he used that against us, you know. We were so in need and search of a family that we were willing to kind of abandon, not see the families we already had. Because Ambrose, you know, enjoyed it. I mean, because let's not forget, he was locked up for like 75 years, and he was kind of free, allowed to be a part of something else, be part of this Judas society, be part of something greater. And the same thing for, you know, Prudence. Like I said, I mean, because even later on when the anti-Pope had showed up, it's like he introduced her. It's like, oh, she's just some orphan, blah, 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 and kind of disregarded her, even though that's his daughter, you know? It was only when she kind of proved herself to be someone useful to him that it was like, oh, now I accept you and love you as my daughter and stuff like that. It's so sad about the whole Letitia situation, which she was going to name her Judith, which, I mean, it shows you kind of like the totally fucked up nature of magic in this world, because it's like, apparently there's a whole big thing of incest. That's weird, because apparently Blackwood's thought was like, okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to have Judith and, you know, Judith grow up together. And the moment Judith, formerly Letitia, turns 16, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have her basically hook up with her twin brother so we can keep the Bloodwood bloodline pure. It's like, you are one twisted SOB, dude. Because, you know, even Patience was like, not Patience, even Prudence was like, wait, what? So, because it's messed up too. Because, I mean, that in itself is already messed up, but it's like, you're literally thinking about it. Your child is just still a baby, but you're looking at, it means you're literally raising her to hook up with her brother. That's twisted. And kind of going back on, you know, on the Ambrose side of things, you do feel bad for him. I did like that thing of like, because like Luke and Ambrose weren't really supporting Sabrina about the whole like Top Boy situation. And I love Sabrina like, wait, was it me or did Ambrose just throw shade at me? Hilda's like, throwing what? And then Zelda was like, oh yeah, he definitely threw shade. It was just kind of interesting that Zelda was someone who picked up on that, not Hilda. To be fair, Hilda's kind of aloof in certain regards, but I just thought that was a little moment I thought was kind of interesting. Because for Sabrina, it was kind of like, you literally won't support me in this. And Ambrose was like, what? No, of course I would. I never said I didn't. It's like, yeah, but you never said you were on my side. Like, he got so caught up in that position and everything. And that kind of ultimately led to Blackwood being able to use him, because he felt like, hey, this is where I belong and everything. He felt important and needed, you know? And even like, because one of my favorite episodes this season was easily that tarot card episode, where basically it's kind of like, oh, be careful what you wish for type of thing. It's really hard to say exactly what Lilith was trying to do. I guess for her, she wanted to twist them and put them in agonizing enough positions. I guess in the long run, the whole Nick situation, she wanted Sabrina to be okay with Nick, to trust him, because by trusting him, it made her in a more vulnerable situation to kind of be controlled by Nick. Obviously, the Dark Lord later on. Not saying he's the Dark Lord, but obviously, like, you know, to help further the Dark Lord's plan later on. But, because Ambrose had that whole, you know, vision about like, oh, being brought into that circle, and it's like, okay, I need you to correct the Spellmans, you know, kill your aunties and your cousin and be a part of this group. And it's like, to a certain degree, because even Ambrose was like, you would never hurt the Spellmans, right? You never ask me to do that, would you? And it's like, in the long run, he would, which is interesting, considering the fact is the Dark Lord is so invested in Sabrina that, you know, Blackwood does all that he does. I mean, he's forgetting that the whole point of Sabrina being there at the academy in the first place is because the Dark Lord wanted that, but I guess he thought was just, he didn't realize just how important she was. That whole situation that Ambrose found himself in, being controlled by Leviathan, it's like, because obviously Blackwood had talked about the fact that he had a plan B, did not expect that he was going around killing the other people. Luckily, Ambrose was able to teleport away before it happened, but him being kind of punished like that, I even love Ambrose being like, oh, I've been locked up for 75 years. You think this witch cell is going to be enough to drive me crazy? But it seemed like they sent someone in there to kind of torture him and everything. And the Weird Sisters know how to really psychologically mess with somebody. They did it kind of to Sabrina, kind of going back to the tarot episode, that the fact is they messed with the whole situation of like, oh yeah, the fact is they found out, it was like, oh, like, I'm surprised Nick would kind of be so tight with you, considering the fact that you gave him blue balls and you killed his familiar. But also the fact is that, like, she was part of the magic show and everything, she's floating in the air and she ends up freezing to death. Like, that's super twisted and morbid. And now, since I'm speaking about it, there's like Rosalind's whole situation of not wanting to get eye surgery because it's like, I wonder, is there truth to that? Like, whole situation of like, oh, her dad like literally got everything he would want, like whether it's like to pay off the house or get a car, just because people would follow him. And that was such an interesting aspect for Roz, because it's like her faith was what she questioned. And it's like, the fact is that her dad would like have such devotion from people, and so for her it made her feel bad, like eventually getting the eyes, and Harvey kind of convinced her to pay it forward. But it's like, oh, lo and behold, it's like your dad got the eyes because he paid someone, Audrey, paid her dad to take her eyes, which is like, yo, Which I guess the whole point was kind of make Roz reluctant to get the surgery. And I guess that whole point was to kind of make her more and more pissed about her circumstances of being blind. So she kind of had, rather than taking a chance that she might get, her vision cleared, I mean, it kind of makes sense later on because it's meant for Sabrina to heal her eyes. So that's a whole thing. So it kind of makes sense. Like, it's interesting because when you really go back to a lot of earlier episodes and with the information you have at the end, you're like, that all makes sense. Like, there was a grander planet. Because I thought she was doing that just... To be fair, she talked about the fact is, like, it was all her sharpening blades. And I guess the whole point was to kind of put everyone in a position where they are more vulnerable in certain regards. Because Harvey, his need to try and be braver and obviously, like, not knowing who he is, his future. It didn't come up too much, but obviously, like, there's a whole aspect of him obviously being, like, a descendant of witch hunters and stuff like that. But the fact is that, he ended up getting into that summer program, and there's that doorway connected to, like, these creatures that came to that dude Howard and everything. But I guess that's kind of playing into his fear of the supernatural world. Theo wanting to change his body to be more like a boy. That was kind of a sweet moment he had with his dad, too, because I think his dad was really accepting of it, being like, because Theo was like, can I get a haircut? He's like, come on, I think it was kind of a nice moment. Of him being like, I've never felt like a girl, so this is who I am. This is who I'm more comfortable as. Even joining a basketball team. Even the whole Billy situation, which, well, I'll get to in a second maybe. Hopefully I don't end up forgetting. But really quickly, that was kind of an interesting and morbid story of like, oh yeah, stealing magic to become a boy. And more of a boy, like having like a more muscular body and everything, but it's like, oh, the rest of your body's starting to turn into wood. And I loved Hilda's perspective of it in that like sequence of being like, oh, my reverse Pinocchio. So literally his dad had to chop his arm off, and it's like, yeah, but I get to keep my body, so yay. But then it's like your legs, and it's just kind of like, in the end, it's not worth it to kind of rush it. I mean, I guess in the end it kind of helped and worked out because Theo gained a lot more self-confidence of like, I don't need my body to reflect it necessarily, because it's like, I feel like a boy, I recognize it myself as a boy, that's all that really matters when it comes down to. Even Zelda's whole situation of like her ambitions, basically the whole thing of like some secrets are best kept, but I guess that gets used against her later on because Prudence ends up revealing that to, Blackwood, so that ends up coming to bite her in the ass. Like, it's a good thing she didn't say anything in the first place, because that would have been a terrible thing anyway. So it's not like if she had done it sooner it would have mattered. It's like, I'm sure he still would have had the twisted plans he had for Letitia, aka Judith, anyway. So. Well, I think it's also interesting, too, the one person, Lilith, because she ended up being a tarot card lady, never did it to Hilda or Dr. Cerberus. I wonder why. Maybe she felt like Hilda wasn't worth doing it to, which maybe that was a big underestimation on her part, thinking like, oh, like, she's not, these are the more people that I guess are the easiest to sway. I guess Hilda being the way she is. You know what this episode kind of reminded me of? I think it might be basically almost the same episode number, because that was like episode 5, I think. It was like 4 or 5, the whole dream sequence with the Batty Bat. Like, it seems like it kind of seemed reminiscent of that episode, which is kind of interesting. I thought it was kind of neat. Just like stylistically, just how the episode was done and just it being kind of like a be careful what you wish for type of episode, I thought was kind of neat. But getting to what I was trying to not forget about, and that is like the whole... Right, I remember where I was going with that. The whole, Lucifer thing. I thought it was kind of interesting, obviously, the bet between him and Lilith. Because, like, Lilith is like, oh, no, like, Sabrina's good-natured. But then Lucifer's like, no. What I'm going to ultimately end up doing is I'm going to reveal that the fact is there's no good and evil. There's just, like, she's going to bend to my will type of thing. Which is interesting because, like, the whole thing is about kind of causing issues and kind of, like, pushing things apart. Because it's like... At first, it's like, oh, you have to do a terrible thing. Like, I'll do whatever I ask you to do. And at first, it's like still a piece of gum. But then, like, Lilith is there. It's like, I'll pay for it and stuff like that. Like, playing hardball with this whole situation. I loved it. Because her thought was like, if I win the game, if I win this bet, you have to make me queen and abandon this whole Sabrina situation. But if the, Dark Lord wins, she basically has to put up with everything that's going down and can't complain anymore. But I did like that at every step, Waterworld was being like, trying to push and nudge Sabrina in the right directions to do the right thing. the reason why I was bringing this up too, because I brought up the whole Billy situation, and that was interesting because like obviously like Sabrina ended up finding it out. It's like the poison that is evil, because it isn't just allocated to her; it's spread to everyone. Because he even started getting to Theo, speaking in Theo's head about like Billy, and ended up using that string to trip Billy, and that broke his leg, which later on it kind of works out because Billy apologizes to Theo and it's like, no, your haircut's badass. It's like, I was tired of like, I think Billy grew up and was like, yeah, I'm tired of me being the asshole that I am, willing to kind of see things differently. Because it's like, it put things in perspective, because not only was it just his leg got broken, which that was pretty brutal. They do that quite a few times, like bones sticking out of skin type of stuff. It's like, ugh. But luckily for Billy, it was just his leg and not his neck. And I think it kind of, puts mortality up there and kind of makes you change your ways. So it was only that instance we saw it, but we do see that obviously Theo and Billy do make up later on because he apologized and everything. And I thought that was kind of pretty neat. But, obviously everything dealing with like the claw marks on her back, and then obviously the Dark Lord wanted to do more, and like eventually like I said, at every turn trying to push her to do evil, like take what's yours. Dorcas is playing Lilith in the play at the academy, and I just love her being like, oh, Dorcas is such a terrible actress, and tempting her to drop the sandbag on her, and we even see her do it in her head, but then she's like, no, I'm not going to do that. So it's kind of interesting because I guess the Dark Lord visits people from time to time, which that's a thing I gotta talk about. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and talk about it. That's actually super fucked up when you find out about marriages with witches, that basically the Dark Lord comes to visit, basically to kind of like commemorate the wedding beforehand. He comes to sample someone, which is me trying to put it. It's a very terrible situation because even Zelda didn't want that. That's just a shitty situation. It's like, oh, like the Dark Lord has to have you first before. It's just a disgusting situation. It's like, holy shit, that's super fucked up. But that's the whole religion. It's about literally giving yourself over to the Dark Lord. And, obviously, because, Zelda and Hilda had that whole conversation. Like, no, it'll be okay. Like, hope, he'll show up and it'll be okay. But even if he doesn't, it'll be okay. Like, you can tell they were hoping he wouldn't show up. But luckily, everything went down the way it did. So everything with the High Pope, so it worked out. Luckily, Zelda didn't have to go through that horrible situation. But the point is, like, I was bringing up, it's like, when it comes to the Dark Lord, everyone had to make situations like, Hilda had like a box that she was supposed to press it and see what happens, but she was too scared to, so she just smashed it open to see what was in it. It was empty. The whole point was just to see that she would do what he would ask. The fact is that she'd be willing to do it. So, and then Ambrose's situation, that was sad. I can only assume, because, we found out about a letter and everything, I can only assume it was Ambrose saying a lot of stuff that happened between him and this dude who was married with a wife and kids. Probably, it was meant to be like causing chaos. I'm sure, because Ambrose never said anything, but I'm sure it turned his life upside down. There were probably terrible consequences to it that Ambrose just wasn't really willing to talk about, which is sad. Interestingly enough, we never found out about Zelda. We only find out about stuff here and there. I mean, to be fair, it kind of comes out in the end, because that's actually what Nick was entitled to do. I mean, that shows you, it's like when the Dark Lord asks you to do something, you do it. Like, obviously, like, Nick didn't start off with the whole Sabrina situation like that. It just came later on when he was already kind of infatuated with her in the first place. So his feelings for her were genuine, but it kind of makes it so that's like, maybe it doesn't matter how you take it. Like, even if it's a situation of you started off with the best intention of liking her, it just got polluted because it turns out it was all part of the Dark Lord's manipulations later on, so it kind of spoils the genuine feelings that you had to begin with. But that was about to freak out too when he was like, oh, now you have to do something more for me, because if you don't, I'm going to kill Salem and all the people around you are going to get hurt because of it. And it's like, she was tasked with burning her school down. I was like, holy crap. But she took a gamble because she learned from Hilda. It's like, he just wants to know that you are willing to do it. And because she was about to do it and the question is, when the time was come, would she have done it? If it meant protecting the people she cared about, I think Sabrina would have lit that match and burned that school to the ground. Just because it meant protecting the people she cared about. She's like, it doesn't matter now, we'll never know, but I highly think so. Especially the fact is, she was willing to take that gamble, but I think if it meant protecting people she cares about, she's willing to make any sacrifice, so. There's a whole thing about Luke that kind of sucks, especially because we find out the circumstances around how he ended up dying. It's kind of interesting because we never found out what that mission was that Blackwood sent him on. It just ended up with him crossing the paths with the Order of Innocence, and I was like, oh man, witch hunters, which was kind of interesting, but it's like it doesn't stop there. They're freaking angels. I was like, what? To be fair, they reference angels in like season 1, part 1, but also at the same time, a stupid thing I let slip my mind. I was like, oh man, I can't believe there's angels and everything. It's like, let's not forget Lucifer exists and he's a fallen angel. I just don't know why I didn't put two and two together, but it was still interesting because at first they fought back the weird sisters. I was like, wait, do witch hunters have magic too? To a certain extent, they have divine power because they're angels. I even love it. You didn't see their wings until they actually died. Like the moment they were burning and everything, they got their wings. Which, holy shit! Easily one of my favorite parts of the season is when she riz back up and it's like, yo, bow down and speak renounce your faith to the true God, the false God, and, serve, and speak your devotion to Lucifer. And it's like, oh, how quickly you shift your faith from your false God, and just her eyes being pupil, like her eyes being white like that, being stabbed, having been shot with arrows, got the thorn crown on and everything, and she's like, I am the Dark Lord's blade, and she burned them, and she brought Melvin and that other witch back to life. I was like, yo! I didn't think about it at the time. I did think about it. It was kind of interesting. I was like, oh, she's got the thorn crown on, and she's got her arms like that. I was like, that's some Jesus level shit. And it's like, she's on her Jesus level shit. That was crazy, dude. Because everyone else literally throughout the entire episode was like, what? Wait, what? You brought people back from the dead. Even like, Zelda been like, we should stay in. It's a rainy day outside. No, Hilda was like, it's a rainy day outside, and it's like, boom, she made it sunny. And Hilda leans into Ambrose and is like, does she control the weather now? And Ambrose is like, I guess so. I don't know. Because like what she's able to do is crazy. Because for her, it's like she's able to bring back Leviathan later on. She's able to do some crazy amount of stuff. And in the long run, we kind of find, because the thing is, it's like, because she's half human and half witch, she's able to tap into some other unforeseen energy. It's actually kind of sweet because, obviously, initially she interpreted her dad's, messages as being like we're supposed to be like together like witches and humans because witches will be able to tap into a power like basically as Nick calls it, like witches 2.0. But obviously we find out later on that's not the case. That's infernal power that she has. So it's like, so I guess Lucifer can do the same thing in a sense of just kind of like not really have to deal with the consequences, like, because it's kind of like, it's not God level magic, but I guess it's on the same level to a certain degree. It's some cosmic energy type of shit. I've been saying that a lot. And that was kind of crazy finding out that even Lucifer's on that same crap as Blackwood of being like, oh yeah, not only am I to be your husband, you're going to be my queen, also I'm your dad. It's like, Jesus. Like the Spellman situation, at least, when it comes to Sabrina specifically, that her whole situation is all kinds of complicated because it turns out, Blackwood's also the one that killed her parents. Like, obviously that was something Lilith did just to kind of push her in that direction, but I guess there was truth to that because I guess the Dark Lord would know, not unless he's the one that orchestrated that in the first place to kill, I mean, to be fair, it seems like that was kind of his own thing, but who's to say that wasn't the Dark Lord commanding him to do that? It's hard to say. Blackwood never outright admitted to killing her parents, but when his reaction later on, especially when Sabrina popped up with his manifesto, it's like, that's impossible. It's like, why is that impossible, Faustus Blackwood? So he never answered, but it's hard to say, like, which way that kind of really went. But it was almost crazy to see Sabrina kind of embraced and celebrated like a messiah. That was super interesting because I love her basically comparing herself to like Pandora's box, and it's like, do you really want to ask all these questions, Blackwood, and lift off the lid? And he's like, how dare you threaten me? It's like, dude, that was crazy. I kind of steered away from about. I'll kind of circle back to it a little bit. It is kind of interesting because we only basically dealt with 3 angels in this episode. In this part, so that could be something we potentially see because I doubt that whole angle of things is done. It was actually kind of interesting when you saw like Agatha actually sad when Melvin potentially was about to get killed, and then he eventually did get killed, but luckily he came back to life. I was like, oh, poor Melvin, because you actually saw Agatha actually worried about him, because he was kind of like a consolation prize. Because I love that whole thing with Nick, when it's kind of like, basically it's like musical chairs. The moment the music stops, you sit and you and that person get together, and it's like, oh, she ended up pushing Sabrina out of the way, but it turned out, oh, that's Melvin. Nick just paid him $100 to glamour himself to look like Nick, just because they knew, Dorcas was on some, I said Agatha, I meant Dorcas was on some like stuff like, she would do like that. Because it's actually kind of interesting, because like in their mind is like, Prudence had him 2 years ago, last year Agatha had him, and Dorcas is like, it's my turn this year, so... To be fair, it does seem like she kind of got her turn. It never came up about that between him and Sabrina, because I thought maybe that'd be an issue. Maybe it's supposed to represent the fact that she did all the kissing on him, but he was able to get away without there being anything else happening in that moment, So when the witches were kind of hunting down their warlock counterparts in that regard, the whole Lupa Kalia situation. Another thing I also loved was like when Harvey went to the school and he met Quentin and the other boys, and it's like, wait, did you say ghost children? Wait, did that boy just disappear? Like him, because obviously he's still kind of waning himself into this entire world, which is kind of interesting, because even the kids didn't want to go, I guess they knew not to trust angels and stuff like that, because even the ghost kids at the school were like, nah, we're not going to go with you. Which is so interesting, because Nick did bring up a good point. It's like, have you not read the Bible? It's like, that's a lot of fire and brimstone type of stuff going down in it, so it's like, of course, angels will kind of reflect that too. I figured there had to be something more when one of them, like when she used her magic to block the door and he burst through it like that. I was like, what the hell is up with that? Are you guys enhanced in something? But it's like, later on finding out they're angels, it's like, makes a lot of sense. And it was actually super morbid of how they actually got inside of the academy. They cut off Luke's hand and used it as a way to kind of like, oh, it recognized Luke's hand, and they were able to kind of get into the academy like that. Just as Ambrose had made his escape, thanks to Hilda, once again, her and her brain. The fact is, feeding the three weird sisters the chicken and hoping that they would be vindictive enough to kind of listen to her and just throw the bones at him, which he used to fashion into a skeleton key and ended up escaping. I'm also curious about something kind of going back to Sabrina's powers and stuff like that. Hilda had brought up the fact is that it's like, obviously, like, you're building up a lot of cosmic, because there's no way you can just do this without there being consequences. I wonder, is there anything coming Sabrina's way? I mean, maybe in the long run, maybe everything kind of played out the way it did because of all that, but it seemed like there was no consequences, that there needed not really be some equivalent exchange for her to do whatever she wanted to, just because no consequences ever outright came up. So I guess like she's able to kind of, at least at that point, was able to kind of just do whatever she wanted to. She could resurrect people, she could heal people like it was nothing. Apparently teleport objects, because she teleported the music box that was connected to Zelda. So I love it when Zelda also found out, when she heard the truth about everything that's going on, it's like, what are you going to be, his child bride? I will not stand for over my dead body. You're way too young. And I just thought, like, it was just kind of sweet, just her mother's and her cousin sticking up for her like that. Like, no, we're going to protect you, Sabrina, especially when it comes out about the whole apocalypse situation. It's actually sad, because Sabrina wanted to reveal her powers to kind of bring the awareness of witches and stuff like that at the party and everything, to make it so that everyone knew the truth, because she wanted to bring people together like her dad wanted to. Like, I think it's something that Hilda was talking about, basically being like a thing of like it being a slow process. It shouldn't be like an all at once, but for Sabrina, it's kind of like, I have these powers, I was brought back for a reason. Later on, she finds out those reasons. It's like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to herald in the apocalypse. It took a while, but it was kind of interesting finally when everything hits. It's like, wait a minute, the one behind all of this was Miss Wardwell, because all the things that I did that she was a part of, pushing me to do, were all parts of kind of leading towards the apocalypse. They were all kind of like seals that basically needed to be broken. I was like, that's so interesting that it finally came out, and especially for Sabrina, it's like she always relied on Wardwell, came to her at every point in time. I love it when she's like, well, yeah, like the fact of the matter is I kind of can't die right now, and Wardwell's like, oh, that's literally after she's literally just started concocting a way to kill you. It turns out you're potentially unkillable. I am curious, like, would Sabrina have been able to be killed at that point in time? I mean, to be fair, like, the Dark Lord is so invested in her. Maybe it's just naturally she can't die. She hasn't been put in a position where she outright dies and can come back. So going forward, she probably still could do that. because it doesn't seem like that's necessarily like the Dark Lord, Lucifer interfering in that regard. It seems like that's just something she could just naturally do. Like I said, it didn't come up for the rest of the season of her dying like that necessarily. Or there's the whole Mandrake situation, but that doesn't count because that's the Mandrake, so I don't think it has that necessary, because all it has is her powers. It doesn't have her essence and who she is, which that whole Mandrake situation is sad because the Mandrake just wanted to be loved. It kidnapped Harvey, Roz, and Theo to try and make copies of them. It's like, oh, like if these versions of them won't love me, I'll make versions of them that will love me, and that's all it wanted. It was actually pretty smart that it ended up faking it by being like, oh, it woke up early enough to put a fake Mandrake there to be like, oh, it didn't work, when in actuality it did. It's kind of crazy because Theo had to bash, like, because especially had to be super messed up because one of them, like the one that was like Harvey, was kind of halfway being born, so it had to be hard having to literally smash its head in with a rock, especially because it looked like Harvey, and then stepping and smashing on the one. Luckily they still look like just mandrakes, but obviously the one for Theo and obviously the one for Roz. So there's also something in this episode I thought was kind of interesting too, the whole Dorian Gray situation. So I know, isn't that the actor who plays Roman in Legacies? That might be the same actor, maybe not, I don't know. But nevertheless, I thought it was kind of interesting because Dorian, because obviously it seemed like, at first it seems like on some occasions he's kind of like down working with all witches and stuff like that, but then later on he sells out Sabrina and Nick to Blackwood. He says basically he's only in it for his self-interest, but then later on, I guess no matter what the circumstances are, he still has to serve the Dark Lord, so like above anything else that still matters. But I guess for him, he was meant to be like, oh, he has the whole eternal youth situation, he had his soul sold to the devil and stuff like that for eternal youth. So I guess for him it's like, I'm more of an observer, so I kind of have no sides in this. I just want to see how things play out because I think it's interesting. That's how I chalk it up, but maybe not. Maybe he had other means at that time that he wasn't really even telling even Blackwood of why he was really doing it. I chalk it up to that, but maybe it wasn't like, as simple as that. Another thing in this I was kind of worried about was the whole like when, Harvey went to, get Sabrina off the roof and being like, if you ever loved me, like, you'll come down. And you saw Roz kind of get a little bothered by it. I love that they do answer that later on. Roz is like, what was up with that? Harvey admits, it's like, yeah, I did love her at one point in time, but it's like, no, I love you. And I'm like, wow, I was about to say things are going to get complicated, especially because Roz was like, oh, the fact of the matter is when she sees stuff with her cunning, it's usually bad stuff. So I was like, oh, is that kiss situation, like you guys being a thing, is that going to cause problems later on? I guess you could make an argument it technically did, because it obviously leaves Sabrina feeling very complicated. It seems like obviously as the season progresses, she gets more and more okay with it, but you can tell it still kind of bothers her a little bit. Because I don't know the comic books that well. I didn't even remember the original sitcom show that well, but like I know Sabrina and Harvey were a thing, but I don't know if like Roz and because I'm pretty sure her friends Susie and Roz are in the original sitcom as well, but I'm not 100% sure. Like I said, I don't remember that show that well, and it's been many years since I've seen it, so I just thought that was interesting, like the love triangle situation. It, obviously, like I said, throughout the season, it was there just because everything's weird and stuff like that. It's actually kind of sad. Like I said, the whole aspect of like, at one point in time, they all thought like, oh, Sabrina, like maybe she's the one that did this to Roz and everything. Just because, like I said, Roz was just angry and just lashing out. And obviously Harvey has his complicated feelings towards magic and stuff like that. But it's also because Sabrina wasn't around and she tried to turn to them. She tried to turn to Nick, which Nick was drinking a lot, which is so interesting in retrospect. It makes you wonder at what point exactly did the Dark Lord come to Nick to start working with them. It's kind of interesting because Hilda was kind of from the very beginning like, I kind of don't like that Nick boy. And it's like, I wonder, did she see something there that kind of gave her that feeling? I do think it's pretty dope that like the three mortals basically help keep the gateways to hell closed. It is kind of interesting seeing the expansion of Roz's ability. Like obviously she can control her cunning a lot more because she's been practicing. It makes you wonder. I mean, because like losing your eyesight is supposed to help make the cunning get stronger, but I guess just practicing it enough, even with her eyesight back, was able to help. I thought it was kind of interesting too, because like now she can actually get to the point like she can literally make you see her cunning. To the point she was able to make Harvey see all the symbols he needed to draw. Theo kind of did a little bit because obviously he is able to see his aunt Dorothea, which I'm still wondering, like, is that something that's ever going to expand, or will it always only be Dorothea? Because I think Dorothea is just kind of supposed to be there to kind of be support. Like, Dorothea doesn't necessarily, because Dorothea was there to kind of wake Theo up when they ended up getting captured by the Mandrake Sabrina. But beyond that, I don't know if that ability will ever expand beyond that, because like the only person Theo's ever seen has been his Aunt Dorothea, and that's it. But I wonder, could that be something we see expanded to be like, oh, you communicate with all ghosts? Probably not. It just might be only ghosts from your family, and maybe there's only one ghost at a time. You know, it seems like, because it seemed like Dorothea disappeared, but Dorothea has popped in here and out. Like, I guess Dorothea is kind of a representation of Theo's courage. It's like you're kind of a symbol of that. So when, you know, it comes in time to be courageous and do what's necessary, like going into the mines with Harvey in that 13th section where they found the prophecy on, you know, written out. So it's actually kind of interesting too. And speaking of like Roz's cunning, it kind of puts something in part 1 in perspective. Remember when Roz, like, you know, Sabrina, you know, touched Roz when she was looking for Tommy's soul, touched Tommy, but then like she turned and saw Sabrina in a monstrous form. I kept being, because even last season, even rewatching, I was like, is that supposed to represent, is that what all witches look like to Roz? Like, is she able to see, like, is that what their true side looks like? But in retrospect, it's like, no, that comes from Lucifer being her dad. So that's that kind of demon side of things. And I think the noose around her neck is supposed to represent, like, the fact is that she's being strung along, that she has always got this impending life and doom above her head, looming above her. So I guess that's what that was supposed to be representative of. Like I said, it could just simply be like, oh no, that's what it looks like for all witches, but it's just the fact that they made such a point to make Sabrina look like that. So that's why I thought like her half-witch side did that, but it seems like that's probably more so the infernal side, because let's not forget what her dad looks like in the whole goat form situation. So there's that. I just thought that was kind of an interesting detail to kind of take what we know now and kind of add context to what we saw in part 1. At least that's how I see it. You know, I'm sitting here and I finally remember, because I was trying to remember earlier, what was it that set it off for Blackwood to recognize Prudence as one of his? And it's like, oh yeah, I forgot. She was literally going to sneak in there and kill him. Which is interesting. You at one point in time was going to kill him, and then you kind of got pissed at other people. You stopped Ambrose from doing it because at that point in time you had been accepted. It's like, oh, he didn't accept me before. I'm going to kill him. Oh, he accepts me now. I'm not going to kill him. It's that type of situation. So it's just kind of, it's actually sad and twisted. I'm chuckling a little bit because it's super, I guess, ironic and fucked up in a certain regard. There's actually this conversation that happens at the end of the part that I thought was kind of interesting, and it was like Sabrina and Lilith, and that was such an interesting parallel. Can we actually break it down? Lilith's situation is very Sabrina's situation is very reminiscent of, you know, Lilith's, because of like the whole like, oh yeah, like, you know, Lucifer having his plans for you, but it's almost kind of like being trapped between that other world, because in her case that was her, like the garden in Adam, but in another side of things it was like, oh, here's Lucifer and like the more darker side of things. And that's what, you know, Sabrina was kind of torn between her mortal side and her, you know, witch side of things. So it was kind of interesting to see that aspect to it. And even Sabrina's asking her of like, why'd you serve him all the time? It's like, well, he promised me this and that because he made her feel good, especially because everything between them was good until obviously his darker side started taking over more and more. It's actually kind of interesting because we end up finding out Greendale is actually the place that he fell when he fell from heaven, and it kind of eventually got built on top of it. Also, there was once again, I don't catch all the Riverdale references, but I thought it was kind of an interesting one when she was trying, the whole Mandrake episode, when she was trying to, they were like, oh, we're going to go down to Sweetwater and make a golem. I'm like, hey, Sweetwater. Interestingly enough, isn't it? I guess that's in between Greendale and Riverdale. Because, I don't know, because I feel like you'd have to go all the way to Riverdale for that, which is so interesting, because obviously they kind of coexist comic book wise. They exist comic book wise in the same universe, but obviously it's hard to say whether these shows really exist, because obviously like in the same universe, because Greendale has been mentioned and brought up in Riverdale, but obviously this side of things, because I guess to kind of keep it like this being the supernatural show and obviously Riverdale being the non-supernatural show, I guess you could make them overlap, but then like acknowledging they take place in the same universe would just complicate things, because you'd have to be like, yeah, because in Riverdale with everything that goes down, you then would have to be like, and there's also magic, but we just don't elaborate on it, we don't talk about it. It'd just be a weird thing. I feel like that would always be in the back of your head knowing that. So it's like you can make references to it, so I guess you can make the argument this is like there's a different Riverdale that exists in Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, much like there's a different Greendale that exists in Riverdale, you know, so that's kind of how I've chalked it up. That's how I kind of thought of it before, but I think of it more so like that even more now. Which I should also admit, that whole Mandrake situation was kind of sad, especially because it's like, oh, we're going to have this duel, because the other Sabrina was like, oh, I'm all about honor and stuff like that, you know? And like, you know, the human Sabrina ended up shooting her, and she's like, that's not fair. It's like, yeah, I know. But for her, it's like, she's like, I had to, you know, stop myself because this was all to stop the apocalypse, when in actuality, it just perpetuated and just allowed the apocalypse to kind of play out. It never seemed like it came up, but it does seem like there's always a part of Lucifer that had one of his legs stuck as kind of a goat leg. I don't know if that was something, like, because obviously we saw it when he was naked, well, with the exception of the loincloth, but I don't know if that was something that was ever 100% remedied, or was that just kind of like a constant thing, we just never got to see it. I did like the fact is that when it came down to stopping Lucifer, they did kind of do like a musical number and stuff like that. I thought that was pretty neat. But then it was all about taking him down, sealing him in the configuration. Which, like I said, it's just interesting how a lot of that stuff kind of ties back around. But it wasn't enough to hold him. But Nick sacrifices himself to be Lucifer's host. Part of me was wondering, it's like, you don't think Harvey's going to do it? But it's like, no, Nick does. Because for Nick, it was his way to kind of make penance for, like, breaking Sabrina's heart and breaking her trust like that. So now he's the host that has to hold Lucifer. Wardwell becomes the queen that she always wanted to be. I even love later on, she was like, oh, the fact is seeing you stand up to him gave me such courage. And she's like, I don't believe you. It's like, okay, fine, I want the crown. At the very least, you're honest, so I appreciate that. But it's like, hey, restored your powers. That's the big question. How much of Sabrina's powers has been restored? Is she able to do all the crazy shit she was able to do before? Or is she going back to basically who she was before? Wasn't it episode 7 her powers unlocked? I think so. Like, before she was able to do that, like her more infernal side of things. Because it's interesting, because, like, she's technically like a trio. She's mortal, she's a witch, and she's also infernal. She kind of represents all 3 sides of everything. Which I like that kind of definition of, like, what she is. Because obviously there are gods and stuff like that. Because even, you know, Lilith was like, yeah, he's not on the same god level. You know, to be fair, he has his weaknesses and stuff like that. He is more of a high-powered being, essentially. So, because later on we never actually get to see, like, what it is that she's capable of without her magic. It's also interesting because it's like, hey, she ended up bringing Wardwell back to life. I'm assuming she went back to looking like her original self. Or maybe she kept Wardwell's appearance. Who knows? Which is like, yeah, that's all. Sabrina gets her favorite teacher back, but at the same time, you have to think about it a little bit morbidly of like, oh yeah, let's not forget her fiance is still dead, so that sucks, and she won't ever know about that. Because for her, it's like, oh yeah, basically this entire series, I've been asleep, so what happened? I just happened to wake up, so that was interesting. I mean, it doesn't change the fact is like the principal from part 1, he's still dead, so there's that. Oh yeah, there was also this interesting detail we ended up finding out that basically Lucifer doesn't like onions, which Sabrina was like, I don't like onions either. Maybe that was kind of a side note of kind of being like, oh yeah, there was something there. Maybe, I don't know, maybe not, maybe not. Maybe that's just me overthinking it, just the fact that they both don't like onions. But it turns out the reason why he doesn't like onions is because it makes him cry, and Lucifer doesn't like crying because it makes him feel weak. The last time he cried was the day that he fell, which was kind of like, huh, that's just some interesting tidbit of lore I thought was kind of pretty neat. It is kind of interesting when you look at the end of it all and kind of see the state of everything, because, like, you know, Prudence and both her and Ambrose are going off looking for Blackwood because they need to, you know, they're going to kill him because Prudence made it clear. It's like, I will find you and I will kill you. She's also got to get her siblings back, that being, you know, Letitia and Judas. Which I even love that Lucifer laughed in Blackwood's face and being like, oh, yeah, I know Judas and you're no Judas. Also, like, all of you are going to bow down before Sabrina Spellman. He's like, you're kidding. He's like, are you questioning me? It's like Blackwood has always tried to act so big and tough, but obviously in front of the Dark Lord, it's like, you look so small and weak, you know, so. And speaking of, you know, Lucifer, it is nice to know that there was no necessary evil plan at play necessarily. Well, at least when it came to the parents, because Diana had a feeling that, you know, Sabrina might not be Edward's, because they were struggling to have a baby. They call upon a Dark Lord, but this was all kind of like some self-fulfilling prophecy, because the Dark Lord, you know, Lucifer knew at this point in time he could use this situation to create an ill-begotten child that would unleash the apocalypse and everything. But I guess Edward did sign Sabrina's name in the book just because it's like, well, the fact of the matter is maybe he owed this to the Dark Lord, because the Dark Lord asked you to do something, and that's probably it. He probably had Edward, it's like, the one thing you owe me, you can't disobey me, so the one thing I'm telling you to do is sign her name in that book. But luckily, obviously we learned last season, Diana had put her in, had already baptized her and everything. Which is actually interesting, too, because they ended up being the reason why she was able to be the one to go inside of the church, even though it had been what's the word I'm looking for? Consecrated. It had gotten reconsecrated, but because she's been baptized, she could go in there. So I thought that was kind of a neat little element. But getting back to what I was bringing up earlier, it is kind of sad that, Prudence doesn't get to take her sisters, Agatha and Dorcas, with her, because I love it being, when it's all said and done, it's like, but we're not Blackwoods, but it's like, but the fact of the matter is, you're more my sisters, you're more of my family than Blackwood is. I mean, she literally broke down when she thought Agatha and Dorcas were almost dead. I mean, to be fair, she was behind Sabrina's plan the entire time last season, so of course she wasn't that worried when Agatha got her throat slit, just because it's like, oh, we're going to bring her back anyway. But to be fair, she was worried and scared when she saw her kind of dying. So it shows you how important they are to her, even though she kind of seems like, oh, I'm Queen Bee around here, you kind of follow my orders. They're still kind of a unit. It's like all three of them are a thing. They stand together. So it's kind of sad she's kind of leaving her sisters behind to do this, but I guess because she doesn't want them kind of dragged in all of this. I'm guessing they're chalking it up to be basically a lot of people didn't make it from the poisoning Blackwood did, which that speaks of volumes. It's like, you were so scared that you're running, you're taking your family, and you're literally poisoning everyone on the way out. It's like, could you literally be more of a dick? But basically it's going to be up to Zelda, who is going to be High Priestess going forward, kind of, shaping everything up, kind of leading everything, picking up the pieces to what's left of the Church of Night. And, because it's like, oh, what do we worship now? Because, we can't really be worshiping Lucifer, considering the fact is he wanted to come to Earth and not just enslave humans, also enslave witches, and all of them serve under him and his demons. I'd actually completely forgot to talk about the demons. I thought was kind of neat. The demons that we ended up finding out Asmodeus, I forgot the other one, and then there was Beelzebub. They had come after Sabrina. She was thinking this was all about the whole Top Boy thing, but we as an audience know they popped up way before this whole Top Boy thing went down, because they came out of the mines at the end of the winter special. And it's like, oh yeah, basically they were three demon kings that basically they didn't serve Lucifer. They just didn't want, because they knew what Sabrina was meant to be, and they were like, we're not going to have some bastard child, half witch, half human, take over our throne. They were defiant. They didn't serve Lucifer, so they were kind of powerful kings in their own right. Makes you wonder what they are in comparison to him. The way Blackwood was able to kind of easily banish him makes you think they're nothing compared to Lucifer, but it seems like they've kind of got their own ambition. I mean, it was just kind of interesting. Obviously, that might be something we still see going forward. Especially considering the fact is that, because obviously Sabrina, Roz, Theo, and Harvey are all, what was it? Was it the Fright Squad? The Fright Club, I think is what it was. And basically they're going to, face evil together, which is kind of neat. They kind of see, when it's all said and done, all of Sabrina's sides have come, her human and witch side and even infernal side, kind of dealing with who and what she is and trying to fight evil and find a way to get Nick back and kind of banish Lucifer once for all. He did bring up in this finale that there is a weapon that can kill him. It's like a spear or something. So I'd assume it'd have something to about tracking that down. Obviously, going forward, you potentially could see them we're fighting to protect Greendale. It's actually kind of interesting because when you look at the way the season played out, you can almost be like, that seems like that's an ending off point. I hope that's not the case. I'd love to see more of this, but you can definitely see it being a ending off point. I just looked it up, and the show is coming back for a third season. Like I said, which I'm super excited about, because it seemed like it'd be an ending off point, but there was enough left open for you can be like, okay, I can definitely see them continuing forward, because there's a lot, like I said, especially because they went through the trouble of introducing angels. I'm sure we're going to deal with a lot more of them next season, especially if we're dealing with the whole trying to defeat Lucifer and get him out of Nick. Obviously, this will probably end with them crossing paths with Lilith more, which is kind of something interesting, like the whole conversation between between Hilda and Zelda being like, oh, who do we worship now? I guess we worship Lilith, considering she's the queen and everything. So that's interesting. I also like, obviously, a lot of the doctrines that, Sabrina's father believed in, of like, mortals and, witches living together. Obviously, Sabrina kind of bridging that gap. Obviously, her friends kind of bridging that gap. So I think that's something we'll potentially see going forward into a third season as well. Kind of like more normal people, humans, mortals, finding out about the more supernatural side of things. I'm also curious to see where Hilda and Dr. Cerberus go from here, because I like that Incubus thing hasn't been completely settled. It's still there, because like when that angel came, she just took it off and let him kind of run wild. So that was kind of pretty neat. Like I said, I'm very interested to see what they have in store for a third season. I mean, you literally averted the apocalypse, so where do you go from here beyond just saving Nick and trying to defeat Lucifer? I think those are big enough goals all on their own, so that kind of strikes out what I just said, so. I'm also curious to see what they ultimately do with Sabrina, because they put Sabrina in a very good spot, because obviously, like I said, season 1 was a lot of her dealing with her mortality, and this season is dealing more with her more supernatural side of things for her, so it's like, obviously, she's kind of become more accepting of all sides of herself, so it seems like she's kind of whole. But what is that? I mean, because obviously, also, like I said, it seems like everything's good between her, Roz, and Harvey. That's less awkward situation. It seems like that's good. I love that, Theo finds himself being kind of the third wheel in that situation of being like, oh, I have to sit here and while Roz and Harvey make out and be like, oh, I love you too. It makes things a little awkward, so. Like I said, with Theo's situation, I'd love to see kind of an expansion upon his powers. You know what's so interesting? I didn't realize this until I rewatched part 1. At no point in time did Theo tell anybody about what he can do. Especially considering the fact is that it's like, oh yeah, you know what everyone else can do. You can see Roz, which her cunning continues to expand, so that's definitely interesting. But that's why I kind of feel like there's going to be probably an expansion upon what Theo can do, just because it's also still a kept secret, not unless it's just been said and just never really talked about. Because Roz's cunning keeps coming up all the time, but the Dorothea thing never does. It also makes you wonder, because obviously we delve into it, obviously we learned a bit about it last season. It never played a big part this season, but obviously Harvey's family comes from witch hunters, and I'm curious what that would be going forward, especially if we focus adding the angel element to this, what that might mean for Harvey going forward. I don't know, because obviously he has this very strenuous relationship with magic, but obviously things have kind of changed and everything. So I'm just curious to see how it all ends up ultimately playing out in the third season, especially with Zelda in control of the witches and warlocks, Ambrose and Prudence off on revenge. We never actually did find out, obviously, well, I guess, Prudence just came and just took her, because, the whole, Drismelda situation, wasn't it? So I don't think she got hurt or anything, so I'm assuming she's still out there in the woods, but still, beyond that. I'm also curious, because I brought up the whole thing of Lilith being in hell now, it's but who's going to fill that role in that regard? I mean, I guess we don't need someone playing the secret evil person. I mean, there can always be someone who pops up later on, but kind of that mentoring role like that. Even though her role was meant to be a mentor in the bad way, which I'm also kind of bummed out a little bit, because that also means we won't be getting a lot of Michelle Gomez, just because I've loved her as the Master, in Doctor Who, well, Missy, but I also liked her as Lilith / Wardwell. So obviously we would be seeing Wardwell, but she'd just be more in a teacher position, and she'd probably have to come back and be like, oh yeah, I'm principal. How the hell did that happen? What did I miss in my life? And that's just ooh, that's a whole can of worms all on its own. So I'd be so interested, like I said, to see what they do with a third season. I have no idea. There's so many different possibilities of where they can go. So, oh yeah, there's also that element of, let's not forget, Hilda did kill one of those council members, and that was also a thing of oh yeah, there's going to be retribution for that too. So we're going to see whether anything really happens to Hilda next season. I mean, if they find out about it. I mean, she did out. I don't know if that's something they really covered up or really bothered. I mean, they had a lot to kind of deal with at the time, so that might kind of end up swaying a little bit to the side. I think there'd probably be a thorn in Hilda's side later on, because she was the one that kind of came and confronted the council too. She was basically like, oh no, you don't want to bother with Blackwood because you know if he goes down, you guys go down too. And the fact is you want to act all high and mighty, but the fact of the matter is at the end of the day, you're all like us. The fact is, and even calling them asses and walking away, which like I said, like, dude, Hilda is crazy. In a good way. You know, now that I'm sitting here thinking about it, that Lucifer has kind of been taken out of the picture, and obviously Lilith is on the throne. I'm sure there'll be other people who might try and aim for it, but no one should come after Sabrina in the same regard as, like, the 3 demon kings that had come after her previously, just because she's no longer a threat to their throne anymore, so I don't know. I mean, that doesn't mean... I'm curious, like, we would even get a look at it. We got a little look at it just when we're seeing, like, Lilith carry and Nick into it. That's about it. But beyond that, we may never really get a look at it. I'm curious, like, whether demons and monsters would come across it, if any at all. It's actually kind of sad, too, because I just thought about, like, oh, yeah, didn't even talk about Adam, the scarecrow that she made from her own rib and everything. Which is kind of sad that things still didn't play out. Obviously, I thought that was going to build up to something more just because she was, like, trying to basically train him to be the ultimate monster. But didn't work out for her in the long run, so... But really, that's all I wanted to talk about in this episode, I think. I've rambled on long enough. But to the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.